The software that would use OCR to scan hard-coded subtitles from video and convert them to scripts. And because of this very narrow original scope, SRT files have a very simple structure. When you open one with Notepad, you notice that every subtitle is made of 3 parts. The sequence number, the timecode telling the player when the subtitle should appear and disappear, and finally the actual text itself, the thing you see on screen. This is very basic but also very clever, and it works, but it is no match for the S. S also gives you fonts, positioning, effects like shadow, bold, italic, underline, karaoke, animations. Heck, you even get multi-line styling, so you could have different styles in the same subtitle line. S is how I managed to get color subtitles in my Format Wars video. However, that shouldn't have worked. YouTube allows you to upload subtitles in different formats, but S is not one of them. There are some other compatible subtitle formats that allow you to get different degrees of customization, but none of them gives you access to every single one of these features at the same time like S. However, after you upload your subtitles to YouTube, it doesn't matter what they were because they internally get converted to YouTube's own proprietary format named SRV3 or YouTube Time Text, YTT, which has already been reverse engineered, and you can find a few GitHub projects that let you convert your S files to YTT, and YouTube is going to accept those just fine. You can just upload them, and even though the styling doesn't show in the subtitle page, after you save the subtitles and you go to the actual video player, they work. So let's take one of my classic videos, okay, the Homebrew channel music one. I've already made subtitles for that video ages ago and they were in the SRT format. When I convert them to the S format, what I get is this suite of options of like new stuff that I can do. And there are 2 things that I'm very interested in: subtitle position and styles. The way YouTube summarizers usually work is by scraping the subtitles from a YouTube video and then giving those to an LLM like ChatNES, asking it to make a summary. So the LLM then takes a look at the subtitle file in order and tries to explain what's going on inside. So what if, exploiting the S format, we add for every real subtitle line that a human is supposed to be able to read, 2 chunks of text out of bounds using the positioning feature of the S format, with their size and transparency set to 0 so they are completely invisible. Something that an LLM can easily figure out, like if you can understand we are trying to trick it. Instead of putting random words, we actually copy-paste works from the public domain, and for extra measure, we replaced most words that are with synonyms. Now, doing this manually would be a pain in the ass, so I just made a Python script that does this for me, and it kinda works. It spits out an S file that I have to then open using Agisub to then modify the styles to make sure that the ones out of bounds are also invisible and 0 pixels big. I can then finally use this other tool called YouTube Subconverter to convert the S file into a YTT and upload it to YouTube. And as you can see, the subtitle page is a fucking mess now, but when I actually reach the video page and I enable the subtitles, everything seems fine. Alright, so before we go any further, I want to go here and remove... Okay, there is no automatic captions track yet, so I should just be able to go to summarize.tech. I can paste my video and see what happens now. The tomfoolery test video presents a thorough examination of the evolution of mechanical engineering in aviation, emphasizing the complexities of engine designs, including steam engines and various propulsion systems. That's the garbage data. It's only summarizing the garbage text. There is no... Okay, wait, here. We have a slight mention of the Homebrew channel, and then it goes back to the garbage text. Yeah, this is working. This is working great. Crisp YouTube summarizer. Doesn't Crisp like make a noise cancelling thing? Why are they making YouTube summarizers now? The discussion begins with the necessity of springs behind the delivery valve. This one doesn't even try to talk about the Homebrew channel. Sumtube.ai. Let's try this one. The effects of Discord on programmer humor were catastrophic. Oh my god! This is like 136 automatic captions get made, we delete them because we already have our own track, which is the one that's poisoned for AI. If we have the automatic one, then the summarizers are going to default to that one, and therefore this trick won't work. Gemini is actually pretty smart about this. If you ask it to make a summary of a video and the video doesn't have automatic captions enabled, it doesn't even try. When I first came up with this method 1 year ago, I was over the moon. Then I tried opening one of these videos on my phone, and yeah, transparency and position don't really work there. So any reasonable person would just give up. Do I sound like a reasonable person though? Since the problem is that transparency and positioning don't work properly on mobile and they show black squares, I decided to write a Python script that scans the video and finds every instance of a full black frame. So for example, when I fade to black now, there are like 30 subtitles on screen right now, but they are black on black so you can see them. I ended up having a local LLM generate a story that is similar to the real script, but with completely made up facts, and also threw that in the out-of-bounds subtitle text repository, and that ended up working perfectly. I managed to confuse GPT-4o every time it tried to recap my video. So I can confidently say that as of today, 22nd of January 2025, this is a pretty effective way of fighting the most common slop makers. I can't really do a lot about Whisper right now. I have to figure out a way to trigger audio hallucinations without making them obnoxious to humans. Also, bigger and newer models like ChatGPT's o1 are able to sometimes filter the noise and actually understand the real topic of the video. They are able to see that I'm tricking them. However, there would be yet another step that could potentially work by simply filling the memory of any LLM so much. It's simply wasting so many resources, it can't do anything about it. And that would be dividing every single sentence in the subtitle file per single letter, specifying the position on screen and the timing. So to a human watching the video, they would see the complete result of like this patchwork, because the player can do it easily as part of the logic that displays the subtitles, but an LLM would have to like read every single letter in order, and that's where we pull another trick, because since the player doesn't need the actual subtitles in the text file to be in order, when you're playing the video, the player just loads the entire file in RAM and displays the subtitles according to their timestamp. But we can scramble the order of the letters in the text file, and the video player is gonna be fine because he can just reference the timing. But an LLM has to waste resources reordering every single letter for every sentence, and then from that, it has to piece together the words, which, depending on how the scraping is done, means doing it without having the position data. So it has to like play Scrabble for every single word. And eventually, if it can do that correctly, it can theoretically try to summarize something. But yeah, right now it just gives.
Possibly the worst video game Nintendo has had the misfortune to publish. Avoid at all costs. This is disgracefully bad. It's hard to believe that the critics at Eurogamer would direct such scathing words towards an innocuous Mario game. But at the time, they weren't the only ones. In fact, the consensus was quite clear. But how did this even happen? How did Nintendo release a product that was so universally hated that we're still hearing the echoes of disappointment? to this very day. Let's find out today. I have always considered my browser to be a means to an end, a tool that gets me from point A to point B like a Toyota Camry. But instead, Opera GX, the sponsor for this video, is like the Lamborghini of the browser world. It's big, it's loud, it's obnoxious, and it's packed to the gills with gaudy and ridiculous features. You can customize every single aspect of the browser with GX mods. You can browse the GX store, and they even have mods that align with my stupid and terrible taste, for instance Garfield, or Yika Postmodern RPG. And these mods have their own background music, keyboard sounds, tab sounds, color themes, wallpapers, and the ability to tweak them to your exact specifications. In the GX corner, there are GX Games, which is a collection of indie games that are personally curated, and you can play them right in Opera GX. And completely genuinely, Ubercat Overdrive is one of the best games I've played this year. But now Opera GX is even smarter, because you can click this button right here, and it opens up a panel that goes straight to ChatGPT, and I can ask it this particular question, and ooh, yikes. You convinced yet? Smash that link in the description to check out Opera GX for yourself. I'll be the first to admit that I am not a big Nintendo fan. I'm not usually one to go out of my way to defend the company or their games, but regardless of my feelings, the Mario franchise has a legacy of exceptional quality. It represents nothing short of the gold standard for video games, but having a reputation that strong is as much of a curse as it is a blessing. Nintendo is always under the microscope, and if they slip from their status quo even the tiniest bit, the wave of criticism will be swift and unforgiving. There is no period in Nintendo history where that was more true than in the early 2000s. The Y2K era of Nintendo spoke to me so much because they were completely unpredictable. The games they would release would be so esoteric and experimental to the point of being downright bizarre, because that's just what they did. That's what Nintendo was good at. And yet, simultaneously, fans had never been more divided. Every single major Nintendo release was met with backlash, which if you look at the big picture from back then, it actually wasn't that unreasonable. Nintendo had set a precedent of making a promise and then delivering something completely different to what they promised. When the GameCube was announced at Space World 2000, they showed some demos to prove what the console was capable of. Among those demos fans came away from the event excited for a new GameCube Pokemon game, a beautiful new Zelda game, and the long-awaited sequel to but instead, what actually ended up releasing was a spin-off Pokemon game where you watch TV with Pikachu, a squishy cartoon Zelda game that seemingly came out of nowhere, and a Mario game where you roleplay as a janitor to clean up slime and graffiti. There's nothing wrong with putting out a teaser, of course, but these teasers accentuated the already prevalent issue of Nintendo's marketing being misaligned from the actual product. Gamers felt like they were being misled, and you can't really blame them. Nintendo said they were making a Kirby game for GameCube. Alright, Kirby game on the GameCube, this is gonna rock. Nope, just kidding, it's a spin-off kart racing game. They announced a new Yoshi game for Game Boy Advance. Yeah, we love Yoshi, but what they didn't say is that you have to tilt the Game Boy Advance all over the place in order to play it. And when they said they were making a Donkey Kong game for GameCube, fans were raising their eyebrows like, surely this one's not gonna be normal, right? No, of course not. You have to plug in a stupid bongo controller and slap the bongos and clap your hands like an ape. And that is how you play the video game. Back then, the dissonance between Nintendo and their fans was palpable. It took a long time for Nintendo and the fans to see the GameCube era as anything but a failure, when, ironically, they had never been more ambitious. There were so many games from the time that are absolutely irreplaceable. Animal Crossing, Chibi Robo, Luigi's Mansion. When it comes to experimentation, you have to take the good with the bad. The jump from Super Metroid to Metroid Prime was so insanely huge that I'm very willing to forgive some wonky controls and some weak storytelling. But because people were already unhappy with Nintendo at the time, critics would take tiny missteps like that very personally, which is especially bizarre in retrospect now that these games are heralded as absolute masterpieces. All of the anger that people had towards Wind Waker on release faded away as time went on, and now is considered to be not only one of the best of the series, but one of the greatest video games of all time, pretty much universally. Surely that would imply that these games were always great, and it was just just a difference in perspective that prevented people from seeing that. But what's even more weird is when you consider the Nintendo games from that era, where the generally accepted opinion never got any sort of revision. And the subject of this video fits perfectly into that description. In 2005, Nintendo released Mario Party Advance for the Game Boy Advance, and it's one of the most unique, misunderstood, and avant-garde Nintendo games of the last 20 years. It's a game that's very difficult to categorize, and that is exactly the problem. Mario Party and party games in general are fast-paced multiplayer experiences. You're supposed to have your friends over, pass out the controllers, and compete with each other. It's a Mario game that you can play when you're so when Nintendo releases a game called Mario Party Advance, you would anticipate that it is Mario Party on the Game Boy Advance, and the marketing even reflected that. But the game that actually released is not that, not even close. It's a single-player, story-based experience where you explore a wacky board game world, go on fetch quests, solve puzzles, play minigames, and earn collectibles. So when players bought the game, rightfully anticipating for it to be Mario Party, and discovered that it wasn't what they were promised, they left a bad review. And as a result of that, Mario Party Advance holds a literal Guinness World Record for worst received Mario game. This game is so verifiably hated, it's fascinating. But you know how public opinion on Wind Waker gradually shifted to be in favor of the game? Mario Party Advance, even though it was from the same time in Nintendo history and suffered a similar fate, still manages to be in a permanent state of bad game deadlock to this very day. Does that mean it's an exception? Is it actually just a bad game, and that's why people still hate it? To answer that question directly, no. It is just a marketing issue. Nintendo's absolute weakest links from the time were their PR and their marketing. It felt like when fans wanted Nintendo to zig, they would zag every single time, and it was really frustrating. And it didn't help that their products were too unpredictable to actually market properly. How do you market Chibi Robo, Doshin the Giant, Cubivore? These games are masterpieces, but they're literally so weird that they're impossible to market, so they ended up failing commercially. I am obviously very willing to believe that Mario Party Advance began its development as a handheld version of Mario Party, but I imagine they ran into some technical issues and some game design challenges that required them to rework it from the ground up, and that's why the early marketing doesn't line up with the final product and why fans felt like they were being misled. But ultimately, the only reason this game is hated is because of the title. It opens the door to comparing it to a series of games it is nothing like. And that's not the fault of the fans, and that's not the fault of the critics. It is the fault of Nintendo, because a spin-off should never stray from the source material as much as Mario Party Advance does while still sporting the name. As far as I'm concerned, that is a valid criticism, but I've seen over and over again that at the time and in retrospect, gamers do not have the ability to look at this game in a vacuum. It cannot be considered on its own merits, so I've taken matters into my own hands. This game is now called Mario's Carnival Quest. It features Mario and friends, the word carnival sums up the setting of Shroom City well enough, and quest implies it's an adventure game, and not a party game. This is not a Mario Party game. Maybe it was at some point early in its development, but that's not the product that was released, so the original title's gotta go. If you're looking for Mario Party content, look elsewhere, because this is Mario's Carnival Quest, a different game entirely, as it always should have been. With all of that out of the way, oh my god, we can actually talk about the content of the video game instead of just everything that surrounds it. Mario's Carnival Quest begins by welcoming us to Party World, a magical place dedicated to partying high above the sky with lots of games and gadgets for everyone to play with. But peace would not be held for long as Bowser and Koopa Kid attack. All the games and gadgets are stomped from Toad's hold and dropped straight down to Shroom City below. The Shroom City residents discover the games and gadgets that mysteriously fell from above